one of the reasons the Chargers' 4-7 season so far is so disappointing is because of how many talented players are on this team. But when you take a closer look, is this really a roster that's loaded with talent?
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together now for 8 seasons, but this is our 6th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys, as always, for making this your first listen today, and to make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Well, Daniel, it is buy or sell, so we got to get into the biggest storylines and overreactions for the Chargers. Like, is this Chargers roster really that talented? And who is to blame? Is the blame on Brandon Staley, or is it more so on Tom Telesco?
A real chicken and egg situation there, right? Because it's like, is it Brandon Staley not getting enough out of the guys that are on the roster, or did Tom Telesco just not build a good enough roster to compete with some of these good teams in the AFC? But this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute ticket, lowest price, guaranteed. David, we always get into our buy or sells and the biggest storylines and overreactions on Tuesdays, and there's a lot flying around after the Chargers went to 4-7. But one of the things that seems to be kind of surfacing right now is something I brought up a couple times, which is just the perceived talent that's on the Chargers roster. We know they have a lot of big names. We know they have a lot of guys getting paid at the top end of their position, right? But the buy or sell is this. The Chargers roster is loaded with talent.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the surface of this question, especially if you had asked me before the start of this season, I would have said, yes, it absolutely is loaded with talent. Look at all the big names that they have on both sides of the ball. Look at all the star power they have at the wide receiver position. The offensive line is so much better. On defense, they got some great pass rushers. They have some corners that can take the ball away. They have a couple of safeties that can really, really play football. Derwin James, fantastic. But when you take a little bit closer look at the numbers, Daniel, it definitely does not appear as it seems.
Yeah, I've said this for a while now. We haven't really dug into it, right? But I've often said just one of the biggest things is just that, you know, the Chargers have a lot of name brand value, but like the actual talent and also the guys kind of in between those big names are a lot of misses and a lot of guys that aren't either playing up to their potential or just aren't good players at this point in their career. I mean, I think when they were fully healthy, I think they had plenty of talent on offense. When you had Joshua Palmer and Mike Williams, when you had Corey Linsley, who I think fixes at least some of the problems they have on their offensive line, which has been bad without them, right? You had enough talent there to succeed. But without those guys, I mean, the Chargers, even on offense, feel pretty devoid of talent. And I think the biggest thing is just like, whenever people bring up the Justin Herbert narrative and him not being good enough and the QB win stats and the stuff that always drives us crazy as some, you know, people that have watched him, we'll talk about if Justin Herbert was bad in this last game against the Raiders and the Ravens later on. But it's always, hey, this guy has a loaded roster and he still can't win. So therefore, by default, it must be his fault. And he has some of the blame to share, right? And we'll talk about that more. But if you're going based on the Pro Football Focus grades, it's always had to be taken with a grain of salt, right? But there's not a lot of better ways to compare what the Chargers have compared to everyone else around the league, because I'm not going to pretend that I know every roster inside and out throughout the entire NFL. It would be impossible to do.
Yeah.
But when you look at where their players are comparatively to other teams, it's not great offensively, right? I mean, this is what you're talking about. Wide receivers, you have Quentin Johnston, who ranks 102nd out of 122 qualified receivers with enough snaps. You have 98th out of 122. You have Keenan Allen, who's awesome. We know that. He ranks 10th out wide receiver so far
no
this
surprise
season.
there.
This one was a little surprising how bad it was. Running backs, Joshua Kelly, 55th out of 59 eligible running backs. Austin Ekeler, 53rd out of 59 eligible running backs.
And yet they still don't want to give Isaiah Spiller any opportunities when you have two of the 6 worst running backs in the NFL per PFF. That one is mind-boggling to me.
It is. And I mean, the offensive line, I mean, the only person that's even top 27 at his position is Rashawn Slater. Pipkins is 54 out of 83 guys. Zion Johnson, 50 out of 79. Jamari Sawyer, 43 out of 79, which is, I guess, about average in this. And then Will Clapp, only 5 centers worse than him so far this year, according to PFF. Corey Lindsey, when he was in, was 18th. But, like, they have 1 player graded in the top 20 at their position on offense outside of Justin Herbert. They have 3 players ranked in the top 32 at their position on the entire offense outside of Justin Herbert, which means obviously the other 7 guys are ranked below that, and a lot of them closer to the bottom than they are the top. Yeah. And when you look at it through the PFF lens, which is imperfect, obviously, and there's some grades I don't totally agree with, the offensive line one seems like it kind of matches up with what we've seen. I think Slater's gotten dragged down a little bit because playing through injury.
Yeah.
But it looks like a below average unit that's getting carried by a superstar quarterback and obviously a Pro Bowl level wide receiver.
And I mean, that matches up. I mean, when you watch the Chargers this year, especially lately, it's been Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen getting absolutely, every single catch pretty much. Yeah. And then you see, it's 95, 96% of the offense. And then it's Austin Ekeler for a little bit. And then there's a few other people that get a few catches here and there. But that's it. I mean, and after a while, it's pretty obvious we got to double Keenan Allen. We got to stop him. Yeah. We got to force literally anybody else to beat them because the level of talent between Keenan Allen and everybody else is so much drastically different that you kind of know what it is. You know what they bring to the table, and it's obvious how many other deficiencies there are in this offense other than those 2 guys.
Yeah, and at tight end, they had Gerald Everett 22nd, Donald Barham 36 out of 72. That's average. Stone Smart is like 70 out of 72. Not great there.
Yeah, his grades are not pretty. Don't look at them.
But like it kind of shows you, what Justin Herbert is working with, especially for those that are saying, look at all he has at his disposal, right?
Yeah,
defensively,
not a lot.
Obviously one of the worst defenses in the NFL so far this season. They have 1 player who's ranked top 10, or 2 players defensively that are top 10 at their position. Khalil Mack, which is no surprise, ranks 6th.
Right.
Alohi Gilman ranks 5th.
That one was a surprise. Honestly.
That one is a surprise. I don't even know if I totally agree with it, but really he had 1 really bad game against Detroit. He missed a couple games versus injury, but other than that, he's been very solid. Derwin James ranks 45th. You can't pay a player like that to be 45 out of 88 safeties and have him be the highest paid safety in the game.
Not at all.
Right? I think this is the biggest problem. The linebackers, my gosh. Out of 79 linebackers, Eric Kendricks ranks 52nd. Kenneth Murray ranks 71st. I didn't think Kenneth Murray had been that bad, and I think there's still things he's made a lot of improvements in, but 2 bottom-tier linebackers according to PFF. The corners, you have Asante Samuel Jr. who's 28th. Respectable, right? Decent, for sure. Then you have Michael Davis at 100 and Jasir Taylor at 92 out of 119. So I think it becomes, David, okay, well, does Brandon Staley even have enough to work with defensively for this to be a good defense? But you have to also balance that with he went and got a lot of his guys too, which is what makes it tough.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it does. But I mean, I think in year 3, the list of excuses are a lot smaller than they were in year 1, where you're coming into a new situation where, you're trying to figure out how to make it work, how to try to fit all of the, the round holes into the square pegs, and it just didn't really work. In year 2, they tried to, invest some money into that, and then you're trying to figure out how that works. And then year 3 is, hey, you have all your guys that you wanted pretty much. You have guys that you drafted, have guys that you signed, and it's still an unmitigated disaster on the defensive side specifically. There's only been a couple of shining examples of guys and moves that you've made that have really, proved to be great moves. Other than that, it's been a lot of swings and a lot of misses.
And some of these guys have been good before, and that's what makes it tough, right? And they're playing worse. Obviously, Derwin James being one of them, but like 2 players ranked in the top 20 at their position. How much is the scheme affecting these guys, and how much better would they be graded if they were in a better scheme? And I think the biggest thing here is just, does it feel like Brandon Staley is maximizing the players, some of who he handpicked? No, it doesn't, right? So even with these low grades, it can be the Chargers aren't talented enough, and I don't think that Brandon Staley has taken a super talented team to 4-7 for sure, but he has a lot of the blame for that, right? But does he have more blame than Tom Telesco? That is a conversation that we need to have. We're going to get into that coming up right after this. First of all, I do need to tell you guys about Game Time, which has made ticket buying so easy for me because the last thing you want to do, especially when you're going to an event, is stressing out about where you're going to get your tickets and how much your tickets are going to cost and everything like that. With Game Time, you don't have to worry about that because with killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you're going to have. And how do I know that the Game Time is going to get you the best price? Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. With zone deals, you can also pick a section and Game Time picks the seat, and you can get an average of 18% savings, and you know which section you're going to be in. And with Game Time, you always get to see the view from your actual seat, which is a game changer and always makes you want to buy things even more because you're like, oh my God, I could be right there watching the Chargers, watching the Lakers, whatever event you're going to, music, comedy, it doesn't matter. You can get your tickets with Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKDOWNNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. David, let's continue this buy or sell here, and you can't really have a full conversation about what this Chargers roster looks like without being able to kind of parse the blame of, how did we get to this point? How did we get to being able to only surround Justin Herbert, who we know is good, right? And we're not gonna have that debate today. If you watch the show, you know how we feel about Justin Herbert. Could we be better? Yeah, we're gonna talk about what he did in this last game. But with a roster that isn't as loaded as people think it is, that's not as good, that guys that they're paying and the big contracts that they've given out aren't producing the way that they should. So this is the next buy or sell here today. Tom Telesco is just as much to blame for the Chargers' failures as Brandon Staley.
Yeah, this was a really interesting one for me, and honestly, I think I'm going to side with the head coach on this one. I feel like as far as who has more to blame, okay, because Tom Telesco. I think when you look at the moves that were made, especially in the last couple of years, all the signings that they brought in, those are all guys that, Brandon Staley basically handpicked and guys that he wanted. I think when you look at all the moves that they've made, there's only been one really, really good move out of all the draft picks and all of the signings and all of the trades that they made. And I'm talking about the trade for Khalil Mack. I mean, I think trading a second-round pick for Khalil Mack, especially with the way he's posted, he's been available, and he's produced at such a very, very high level, especially this season. I think that has been a great move. But outside of that, you look at the J.C. Jackson move, which was an unmitigated disaster. You look at, bringing in, a couple other, the defensive linemen played decently. Austin Johnson, Sebastian Joseph Day. I don't think that they've lived up to their contracts at all. But these are all guys that Brandon Staley has either worked with or wanted to bring in specifically to operate his specific defense.
As we see it.
As we see it, right? Yeah, as we see it. But I think you look at that and you can see obviously that it's not hard to find out that the Chargers defense has been one of the worst in the NFL. And after you have all of the players that you specifically wanted and, the Chargers spent very liberally on and still have one of the worst defenses in the NFL, I feel like that's more on the coach than it is the general manager.
I guess it depends on how big and how macro you're kind of looking at it, right? For 2023, Staley, you're in these games. He's close with a roster we just talked about being not a loaded roster, right? I don't know. I think I lean more towards buying it because the thing is even if that's the case, if you're trying to maximize your head coach, which Tom Telesco had a huge part in hiring, right? And the thing is Tom Telesco's in year 11 now, right?
Yeah.
The Chargers have failed to put good enough rosters around not just Justin Herbert, but Phillip Rivers as well since 2015.
Yeah, for sure.
When Tom Telesco was there. And you could say, okay, well, coaching's let him down in some of those years too, which I would agree with. Tom Telesco is going and getting those coaches. We don't know, if John Spanos and Dean Spanos are just pounding the table saying, hey, we're taking this guy no matter what.
Right.
And I'd say, Morgan Fox has worked out, I'd say, for the most part too.
Yeah, I agree with
for
that.
The price. Khalil Mack has been awesome. But if you're the GM, do you get just a total, immunity for signing these players? Because Brandon Staley said to go get him, right? Or Brandon Staley said, hey, this is kind of what we need. I think it's pretty close here, and they're both to blame. But this is what I would ask you, David. How many good players do we know are good from the Chargers' last 2 draft classes that we know are good players.
Yeah, I mean, that we know are good players. I mean, I think for the value, you have to really love getting Jamari Sawyer. I can't say that you can really call him a solid good player. I think probably the only one that you can kind of hold your hat on right now, and maybe that's even up for a little bit of interpretation, is probably Tuli Tuipulotu coming out of this year's draft. But other than that, I mean, there's been a ton of swings and misses. I mean, Zion, definitely the book's still open for him. JT Woods has done absolutely nothing. Isaiah Spiller has done absolutely nothing. So, yeah, there's been a lot more misses than hits in the last couple of draft classes for Tom Telesco. There's no doubt about that.
And you're getting contributions, right? Like, I mean, Jamari Sawyer, like, it'll be interesting. Hey, if you want to, shut the door on the Trey Pipkins thing, do you kick him back out to tackle? Because
yeah, I mean, I like that idea.
Than he's played guard so far, but it's still year 1 of him playing guard. You have Zion Johnson moving back to his more natural position. You can, I'm not going to just, there's still time to grow for sure.
Yeah.
Either way, you take a offensive lineman, specifically a guard, that early in the draft. You're not just looking for good enough. You're looking for good. And as we just told you, based on PFF grades, it's not good, right? I mean, bottom half of the league in guards.
Right.
I don't know, man. And that's why I think Tom Telesco, and we've always said, like, hey, if Staley goes, Tom Telesco's probably got to go as well, and you need 100%. Kind of a full revamp. And there's still other issues, right? With the president of football operations is still the owner's son. How much is he meddling? How much of a role? How kind of symbolic is that role?
Yeah.
How much sway does he have? How much are they tinkering and tampering and things like that? So if you look at the free agent signings and the draft classes from the last 2 years, not good enough to get it done. Eric Kendricks, Sebastian Joseph Day, Austin Johnson's been really bad. I think it was 119th out of 127 defensive tackles so far this year. I mean, man, it hasn't been good enough. And you don't get, you don't get immunity if you're Tom Telesco and say, hey, well, I got Brandon Staley, his guys. You didn't get good enough players. Or
no, they're both at fault.
So bad that he's dragging good players down, but not all of those guys have been, just Pro Bowl level players either, outside of guys like Khalil Mack. But it does seem like one of the moves that Telesco made that was right was not immediately deciding to extend running back Austin Ekeler. So that's the next buy or sell here, David, which is not extending Austin Ekeler was actually the right move.
Yeah, I mean, for all of the flack that we just gave Tom Telesco, I think on this move specifically...
Still a pretty low batting average.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely a low batting average for sure. But on this move specifically, I definitely would side with Tom Telesco and his judgment on this one. So I'm going to buy it. I'm buying it because you look at the lack of production that you've seen so far. I mean, you've seen injuries from Austin Ekeler, and you've also just seen a flat-out lack of production. It's 8 games, 428 yards, 4 touchdowns on the ground, only 3.8 yards per carry, and he's fumbled 3 times and lost all 3 of those fumbles, and they've all been crushing. And also hasn't been nearly as effective as a receiver either. 286 yards, only 1 touchdown. That's 5 touchdowns for Austin Ekeler on the year. And, this is a guy that had racked up more touchdowns than anybody in football over the last 2 seasons prior to this one. And that production is definitely not there. And also, I think you can just see with the eye test, Daniel, that some of that acceleration, some of that burst, some of that kind of, breakaway speed, it's just not there anymore. And for a running back that is, getting close to the age of 30, and, we all kind of know what that kind of death sentence is for running backs, it does seem like the Chargers and Tom Telesco made the right choice, not, choosing to extend Austin Ekeler.
And we said it even in real time, right? Like, I understand why both of these players are trying to do this. Like, Austin Ekeler wants an extension, so in case he has a season like this, he's taken care of.
Right, security.
And I think the hard part is his age, because you can't really just chalk it up to, okay, it's just a bad season and he'll bounce back next year, because next year he's going to be a year older. And, 30 is kind of the Mendoza line for a lot of NFL positions, but running back is even more than that, right?
Absolutely.
How long did a 27, 28-year-old Zeke Elliott sit on the open market this year? You know what I mean?
A long time.
Former top 5 pick. 37th in yards per attempt in the NFL. Anyone that has at least 50 carries this year. 38th in yards after contact, right? I think he's in low 30s as far as missed tackles he's been able to force, and obviously he's missed some games. How much is the ankle bothering him? How much is this just a drop-off because he is a 28-year-old, running back? But at this point, an extension for Austin Ekeler would have been an even further kind of hole they put themselves in a 2024 that already is super clouded. And we'll talk about, what the kind of payrolls are in 2024 going forward, because it's going to be really, really tough to keep this team competitive, right, in 2024, and we'll see who's calling the shots then. But the reason we're bringing up this talent is because that is, from the outside looking in, seemingly the most kind of ill-perceived. Like, they're talented enough to be better than they are, right? But it's also not a roster that's loaded with talent. But yet, when people want to talk about Justin Herbert, that's the first thing that comes out is, hey, look how talented this guy's roster is, and he still can't even win with that. So we're going to talk about if Justin Herbert was actually bad against the Ravens, and how much of that is because the offensive line has been one of the most underperforming units on the Chargers roster this season. We're getting to that coming up right after this. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers Stay Hot on FanDuel, and right now new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. And to break that down, that basically means you can go through all of the matchups of the NFL slate this weekend, find the biggest favorite or whatever team you feel best about. You put a $5 bet on them, you win $150 in bonus bets on the money line when you do that. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action because the app is super easy to use and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, but also great promotions. They have a great promotion for Thursday Night Football this week between the Seahawks and the Cowboys. You can make a 3+ leg parlay with the odds of plus 400 or longer, and it's a no sweat bet, meaning if you lose your bet, you will get refunded in bonus bets. There's no losers there. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season in style. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Let's continue this buy or sell here, David, because there's a lot more about this team that we had to get into and we'll continue to do for the rest of the season. Obviously, with the Chargers sitting at 4-7, kind of just seeing where everything has gone wrong and kind of how we got to this point, right? But I do want to tell you guys about something pretty cool because Locked On has launched the first ever national sports channel, 24/7 streaming on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you, covering 24/7 the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. So go to Locked On Sports Today and on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All sports every day. Locked On, your team every day. But David, Justin Herbert, no matter what the Chargers lose, he's going to take flack. It was a lot harder to blame him after playing like really an MVP against the Packers and the Lions. And there were some things that people could pick on. The Chargers put up 10 points on Sunday Night Football against the Ravens. So the buy or sell here is this, David. After kind of further look, right, and thinking about how that game went, Justin Herbert was bad against the Ravens. You buying or selling that?
I'm selling it, and I think the reason why I'm selling it is you look back and you look at all of the other quarterbacks that have played against this Ravens defense, and it kind of puts it in perspective for you. No QB has thrown for more than 285 passing yards or more than 2 touchdowns against the Ravens all season long, okay? That's every single opponent has not been able to eclipse those numbers. And oh, by the way, the offensive line gave up 18 pressures in this football game. That's a broken record because that's happened pretty much every single week for the Chargers. We'll get into that in a second. But no, definitely not. Justin Herbert did not play bad. He had a ton of pressure in his face. He pretty much only had Keenan Allen to work with. He made it work. He kept the game very, very close and had to overcome 4 turnovers, and the Chargers still were in position to come back and win that football game. So no, definitely not at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at the style and you see a lost fumble, you see an interception, it doesn't tell the whole story. Obviously, hey, you got to hold on to the football. You should see a guy rushing, even if you're not expecting him to get there that quick. Definitely, you can take some blame for that. Hey, you weren't able to pull things off in the clutch, even though, the questionable play call on 3rd and 6, and on 4th and 6, you just don't even have enough time to do anything. Even if you're saying you knew it was coming. Brandon Staley kept calling it a cover 0 blitz, basically saying they were bringing more, but like, 2 of those guys dropped out. They weren't bringing 7 dudes, right? Yeah. Like, simulated they just pressure. Didn't know where it was coming. Yeah. Like, it was coming from the slot. They didn't pick it up. Austin Ekeler could have flipped sides and picked up the blitz, and they would have had time.
Yeah, Justin said, hey, I could have changed the protections at the line.
Sure. He could have changed it to a hot route for Keenan Allen as well, and he should have, right? But I don't think they actually knew exactly where the pressure was coming from. If he could have it back, I'm sure he probably just takes off to the left and doesn't try to just wait for it to get open and just tries to first break the tackle and get out of the pocket and create. Hindsight's 2020. But even in a game that people were saying is bad, still put up 260 total yards against maybe the number one defense in the league. Didn't throw an interception or really have a lot of careless passes against one of the best defenses in the league. Has the one right before halftime in a Hail Mary, which doesn't count on my eyes.
I don't care about that one. Yeah.
And even in a game that you're saying, a lot of people were saying a down game, 12th highest graded quarterback from Pro Football Focus. If you want to see bad quarterback play, you can find it. Go look at some of the box scores around the league. If you think you have it bad, I have news for you.
Go look next week against whoever the Chargers are playing, whether it's Zappy or whether it's Mac Jones.
So you're telling me Justin Herbert didn't have his best game of the season against the number one defense in the league, right? Are we going to crucify him for that? Right?
No.
Like, the thing is, man, is like, yeah, could Justin Herbert have done more on that last drive? Sure. Why at this point does Justin Herbert have to be perfect for you to win? There's something wrong with that. Patrick Mahomes has had plenty of bad games this year. Go look at Patrick Mahomes' box score, man.
Yeah.
He's had plenty of bad games this year. The problem is
he's had a top 6 defense to bail him out.
Yeah, he has some of the most interceptions in the league. The Chiefs don't need him to play perfect to win. The Chargers need Justin Herbert to play perfect to win these games. Like, Justin Herbert didn't fumble it 3 times, right? Keenan Allen and Austin Ekeler fumbled too. Justin Herbert's not dropping balls. His receivers are dropping balls. Like, so it just drives me nuts, man, when the selective kind of cherry picking arguments come out, and it's just like, are we going to say this guy's not good because he's not perfect because the goalposts just keep moving forward?
Well, it's the lazy arguments. It's the lazy arguments from the lazy analysts out there. That's just all this is.
When it's frustrating because, man, of course we've seen this narrative. They haven't been able to come through in the clutch of every game, but I think a big part of that is because the Chargers offensive line specifically, and obviously the lack of firepower that they have has played a big part of that. So the last buy or sell we'll get into here is this, David. The Chargers offensive line has been the most underachieving unit for the Chargers in 2023.
100% facts. Yeah, I mean, no matter how you look at it, they have underachieved. So it's a big buy for me. I mean, they've given up.
It's the most sacks. Though. I think I have someone that can compete with that. A position group I think can compete with that. But go ahead.
Okay, I mean, it's definitely up there with one of the position groups that we had a lot of high expectations for. We thought it was going to be a top 10 unit, and it has not been anywhere close to that. They've given up 20 sacks. Trey Pipkins has given up 7 sacks. Sawyer and Johnson have both given up 4 sacks. It's been an unmitigated disaster. There's been so much pressure in Justin Herbert's face, and it doesn't always look that way or seem that way because Justin is so good at getting out of those situations and avoiding and being able to extend plays and run. But it has caused so many of the biggest failures for the Chargers in those situations where they've had a chance to go win. The offensive line has failed them. And not to mention the horrendous running game that they have trotted out there all year long.
Worst run blocking unit in the league per PFF, 44.2
No
grade.
surprise.
And I mean, that's, PFF take with a grain of salt. Everyone can see it, right? And that's the hard thing about the running backs too. Like Austin Ekeler and Josh Kelly are getting crucified, right? But like, offensive line has so much to do with how good a running back is. You can have a great offensive line and very average running backs and get away with it constantly. And have a
Rex
good
Burkhead, anyone?
Back. Exactly. They've been brutal in key moments. You've seen regression from a few different players. Corey Linsley's not there, which has been a big part of that. At least you can point to that and be like, that changes a lot.
Sure.
But wait, too many free rushers, protections aren't good, and Justin Herbert has a part to play in all that too. And obviously the receivers and the lack of separation they're getting plays a part in it too. I would say if there was another unit you could throw into, that could throw their hat in the ring for this conversation of the most underachieving unit so far this year, the cornerbacks, man.
Yeah.
Like the cornerbacks were supposed to be something where you felt like it was kind of deep. It wasn't. J.C. Jackson's gone and was terrible. Michael Davis just got benched, and he's already been benched a couple of times this season.
For a 7th-round pick.
Benched for Dean Leonard. Jasir Taylor, who is, the guy they felt super good about in the slot, he got benched as well. Like, Asante Samuel Jr. is playing fine, but, like, hasn't taken that step forward after the 3-interception game against the Jaguars where you're hoping, he takes that next step and can be really, really good.
Run.
Still bad against the run. Like, the future at that position looks, for both these. The offensive line has 2 first-round picks invested in it and paying a player the highest at his position with Corey Linsley at the time, right?
Yeah.
Inexcusable. You re-signed Trey Pipkins. You made that decision. He's regressed. Like, it's just, looking at both of those units, they've been the 2 most underachieving. Like, the thing is, I didn't have expectations for Kenneth Murray, so it's hard for me to put the linebackers there, right?
Yeah, I agree with that.
For the corners, Like, you needed a lot to go right. You needed J.C. Jackson to be a lot better. He wasn't. You needed Michael Davis to continue his good play, and he looked really good down the stretch of 2022. He has come all the way back down to earth, and his kind of ping-pong career continues because it's always up and down. And then you just didn't get a step from Asante Samuel Jr., and you're relying, instead of bringing Bryce Callahan back, who was pretty good at that spot last year, you decided to roll out there with Jasir Taylor as the main guy after, it fails with Asante Samuel Jr. Asante Samuel Jr. was on the bench to start this season. He's been the Chargers' best corner so far this year. So, so much inconsistency, so much underachieving by both of those units. But that's the hard thing about Justin Herbert, too, is looking at an offensive line that we thought could be the best in a long time that has just horribly underperformed in 2023. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. We will be back with you guys as we always are tomorrow. And we're excited about tomorrow because we are turning it over to you. It's a Chargers mailbag day, so make sure you guys get your questions in. We are putting a post out on our Twitter at LockedOnLAC. And you can also hit us up on Instagram at LockedOnChargers. Put your question there. Put your question in the YouTube comments if you want, or you can slide into David Drogemeyer's DMs on Twitter at DroTalkSD. You can also go onto the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. Get your voicemail in there. Leave a 30-second question that's likely to get on the show. And you can also just make sure you never miss the show by always following on YouTube and subscribing, and also following wherever you get your podcast from. So thank you guys for checking it out. We know it's been tough. We're happy to be here for you guys for what's next, and it's not going to slow us down. We'll still be here for you guys every day. So make sure you guys are back here tomorrow for our Chargers mailbag, getting into all the biggest Chargers topics that are going on right now. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.